the earliest forgotten and overlooked resurrection texts. Introduction. The three ignored witnesses. When investigating the origins of the Easter story, modern historical critical studies often point to a core layer of textual evidence that fundamentally contradicts the traditional narrative. Dr. James D. Tabor, retired professor of religious studies and Christian origins at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, highlights three critical texts that are consistently ignored, overlooked, and de-emphasized by conservative Christian believers and modern apologists alike. These three primitive accounts, two embedded right within our New Testament and one recovered from an ancient Egyptian grave, challenge the mainstream view of a resuscitated physical corpse. Instead, they preserve a far earlier tradition, a quiet dawn arrival, an empty temporary tomb, a deliberate reburial, and a faith born from spiritual sightings back home in Galilee. Part 1. The earliest textual records. The original ending of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is widely recognized as the earliest written gospel, but its original text ends abruptly at chapter 16, verse 8. Although three alternative endings were appended by scribes between the 4th and 6th centuries to harmonize it with later traditions, modern scholarship completely rejects these additions as spurious and forged. In the authentic text, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome buy spices after the conclusion of the Passover and Sabbath double holiday. Early Sunday morning, they approach the tomb, wondering who will roll back the heavy stone. Upon arrival, they look up and find the stone already moved. Inside, there is no dazzling angel, but simply a young man sitting in a white robe. He tells them not to be amazed, explaining that Jesus of Nazareth has been risen, or literally, been lifted up, and is no longer there. He points to the empty shelf and instructs them to tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is going before them to Galilee, where they will see him. The women flee the tomb in trembling astonishment and say nothing to anyone out of sheer fear. In Mark's original account, there are absolutely no physical sightings or appearances of Jesus in Jerusalem. The embedded pre-Johannine tradition, the first 10 verses of John 20, represent an early, self-contained tradition embedded within the heavily layered final gospel. In this account, Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb while it is still dark and sees that the stone has been taken away. Crucially, she does not suspect a supernatural event. She runs straight to Simon Peter and the beloved disciple, who is identified as James, the brother of Jesus, and declares that they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and she does not know where they have laid him. The two disciples race to the tomb. The beloved disciple arrives first, but hesitates to enter, likely due to priestly purity restrictions during Passover, while Peter impulsively darts inside. They find the linen burial shroud and the separate head napkin rolled up by itself, matching the layout of first-century dual-piece shrouds. The narrative notes that they did not yet understand the scriptures regarding rising from the dead. Therefore, when the text states the beloved disciple saw and believed, it indicates he believed Mary's practical report that the body had been moved for reburial. Immediately after, the disciples simply returned to their own places in Galilee. The Lost Gospel of Peter, discovered in 1886, buried with a monk in an Egyptian tomb. Fragments of the non-canonical Gospel of Peter offer an independent look at this exact tradition. Similar to Mark and John, Mary Magdalene and her friends arrive at dawn to find the sepulchre already open. A well-dressed young man seated inside tells them that Jesus has risen and gone away, up to heaven. Where the Gospel of Peter provides entirely new clarity is what happens next. It notes that at the end of the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread, a full week after the crucifixion, the festival crowds return home. At this point, the 12 disciples are still explicitly weeping and sorrowful because they have not experienced any resurrection appearances. The text states that they each departed to their own homes, and Peter notes that he and his brother Andrew took their nets and went off to sea. Peter openly abandons the movement and returns to his old life as a fisherman. This fragment demonstrates that a week after Easter morning, the inner circle had no awareness of a physical resurrection. Part 2. From raw history to legendary embellishment. When you stack these 3 primitive texts against the later, traditional Gospels, you are looking at a fascinating evolution of a story, a transition from a quiet, historical mystery to a grand, supernatural epic. In the earliest accounts we have Mark, the early core of John, and the Gospel of Peter, the scene at dawn is remarkably low-key. When the women arrive, there is no dramatic event. The massive stone covering the tomb has already been rolled away before anyone sets foot on the property. There are no guards stationed, no seals on the entrance, and no Roman soldiers fainting in fear. Inside, the women don't encounter a terrifying celestial being. They simply find a single young man wearing a normal, clean robe. Most importantly, nobody meets Jesus. The women flee in absolute panic, and the disciples spend the next week weeping in total despair before giving up and going back to their old fishing nets in Galilee. But as the decades rolled on, the later Gospels, Matthew, Luke, and the extended versions of John, began to aggressively scale up the supernatural elements for theological defense. Suddenly, the stone isn't just open. The women actually witness a violent earthquake as a glorious, dazzling angel descends from heaven to roll back the stone right in front of them. Roman guards are added to the narrative, complete with official state seals, only to pass out like dead men from pure terror. Instead of a quiet, empty room, we now see multiple men in radiant, glowing apparel. The biggest shift, however, is in the appearances themselves. In these later accounts, Jesus immediately begins materializing, first to the women outside the tomb, then to travelers walking down the road to Emmaus, and eventually to the 11th hour gathering of the apostles. The geographical command gets flipped entirely. While the earliest traditions tell the disciples to pack up and go all the way back north to Galilee, the later narratives strictly command them not to leave Jerusalem. What started as a perplexing, empty temporary tomb was systematically transformed over generations into proof of a physically resuscitated corpse. Part 3. The historical reburial scenario. If the earliest records point only to an empty tomb and grieving disciples returning north, what actually happened on Easter morning? Let's piece together the highly plausible, rational historical reconstruction based on the text of Mark 15 and John 19. The narrative begins on Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. when Jesus dies on the cross. With the Sabbath and Passover starting precisely at sunset, the burial party faces an intense race against time. Jewish law dictating that a corpse cannot remain unburied over the holy days, colliding with strict ritual purity laws, means that leaving the body exposed or bringing it into a home is out of the question. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy and sympathetic member of the Sanhedrin, secures permission from Pontius Pilate to claim the body. Because the Jewish day of preparation is ending and darkness is falling, Joseph utilizes a brand new, unused tomb located in a garden directly adjacent to the execution site at Golgotha. This tomb is not Joseph's family plot. He does not reside at the place of execution, but is rather an emergency, temporary holding spot designed strictly to protect the corpse from animal scavengers over the two-day holiday. The moment the double holiday concludes at sunset on Saturday evening, the Joseph of Arimathea party returns under the cover of darkness. They unwrap the body from the primary shroud, leave the bloodied linens behind, and secretly transfer the decomposing corpse to its final, permanent resting place, which would naturally be located on Joseph's private family property. When Mary Magdalene and the women arrive at dawn on Sunday morning, intending to complete the proper, permanent Jewish washing and anointing rites, they look inside to find the temporary tomb open and completely empty. The burial party has simply beaten them to it, executing a standard, legal reburial. Conclusion: how resurrection faith was born. If the physical body was simply moved to a permanent grave by its legal custodians, how did the Christian religion explode across the Roman Empire? The answer lies in the nature of the earliest recorded sightings. As the final lines of the Gospel of Peter, John 20, and Mark 16 indicate, the broken, demoralized disciples traveled all the way back to their home territory of Galilee. It was there, by the familiar shores of the sea, that they began to experience profound spiritual apparitions, sightings, or ecstatic visions of Jesus. This matches the earliest chronological document in the entire New Testament, Paul's testimony in 1 Corinthians 15, which predates every written gospel. Paul lists the witnesses of the risen Christ: Peter, the 12, 500 followers, James, and eventually Paul himself. Paul explicitly clarifies that the resurrection body is not a resuscitated flesh and blood corpse, but a life-giving spirit. He equates his own experience, a blinding, internal spiritual vision of a glorified, heavenly Christ exalted to the right hand of God, with the exact experiences of the original apostles. The three forgotten texts reveal that the original Easter faith did not require an empty tomb as proof of a physical resuscitation. The empty tomb was merely the result of a standard, practical reburial. Christianity was truly born out of the intense, transformative visionary experiences of a glorified spirit conquering death from above.